Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another episode of the Brilliant Ones podcast with me, your host, Donnie Adams. Got a special guest in the building, Aaron McCloud, CEO of Intervene K-12. Aaron, appreciate you coming through.
Oh,
Hey,
my
appreciate
pleasure.
it, man.
My
This
pleasure.
is appreciate it. This is super exciting because you have an incredible story to tell, right? I know you spent some time in the Navy. I know you spent some time on the West Coast, but you built a really great company. I mean, and it is serving a huge need, especially now the way the education system is going. Before we get into all of that, so tell me a little bit more about your background.
All right. So I'm originally from Los Angeles. Grew up in LA. Left LA at 18. Joined the military. And I was really, honestly, to escape LA. We had a lot of gang violence growing up in the 80s and the 90s. And we can talk about this a little later, but I was actually much like the students that we service. I was a underperforming student, and really didn't have too much going on when I was graduating from school, graduating from high school. So I joined the military, did pretty well on their entrance exam, and it presented an opportunity, like I said, to kind of escape from LA and see what else was out there, because I really didn't have really too much going on as far as like the next step, right? Coming out of high school. So yeah, man.
Did you think about college at any point? Were you like, let me go get a certification? What made you say, hey, the military is the route to go?
So I did think about college actually. I used to play football, and I thought that that might have been a route to get into college. I really couldn't articulate back then what college was for or anything, but I just heard about college more so than anything. So we when I joined the military, it was they were recruiting. They would have recruiters come to the schools, and I think they bought us lunch or something.
Right.
The Navy guys, and took us down to their little station, and I think I was like in 12th grade at the time. And I actually had gotten hurt that year in football. So that little scholarship, not that I was really going to get a scholarship anyway, but that shattered that. And I remember they approached me at I think a good time where I was like, I just really didn't have a sense of what I was trying to do. And what they presented to me was, I took this little kind of pre-test. I did pretty well. And they said, if you do this, you can go on and be in this Navy nuclear power program, which sounded kind of interesting. I remember taking a chemistry class, and it was interesting, learning about like molecules and energy and stuff like that. So anyway, they kind of talked me into that. And like I said, it was a good opportunity to just get out of California, get out of LA, and just see something different. And be able to buy a car. I remember I wanted to buy a car. I was like, you mean I could get a car and have a little money, get out of the house? Cool. Sold.
So you sign up, you take the test, and then I'm assuming you wait for the results, and they tell you have to go, you have to be stationed somewhere, or how does that process work?
Yeah. So so in the military they have across all branches, they're going to have schools and specialties throughout the country. And so when I took the test, it's kind of immediate results. And, they told me about the this nuclear power program, and that it was in South Carolina, Charleston. Actually, it said Charleston. It was in Goose Creek, South Carolina, which is not Charleston. It's not too far, but
I never heard of Goose Creek.
Yeah, me neither until I got there.
Yeah.
First time I seen an alligator. But anyway, so got the results, and they said, you'd be a good fit for this. And at the time, man, I'm still a kid, and they were like, think about what like Homer Simpson does, right? Homer Simpson, he operated a nuclear power plant.
Right.
And what they sold me on was, this is an avenue to college. I would get some money for college, and I would have a trade that when I got out of the Navy, that I'd have a job. So all of that just kind of made sense.
Yeah. And so after you finished training in Goosehead, were you were required to go station somewhere like overseas or something?
Yeah. So okay. So you start at your in the military you start off at your boot camp, and then if you go to like an A school, specialty school, or whatever, you'll go to that city, or if you go just to the fleet. And so our A school was in South Carolina, and then we had this what they call Power School. Power School was in New York. What they didn't tell me though before I joined is that the fail-out rate of this program, like it was actually pretty competitive. And so when I get there, it's like you have to learn all this thermodynamics and physics, and mind you, I was a failing kid, right? So I go in there, barely graduating from high school with really low performance in high school. And so I go in there, and they're like, you have to take these classes. And man, I'm failing the class. I'm failing all the tests. And they're like, look, if you don't pass these tests, you're gonna have to go to the fleet and paint for the next 4 years. And I'm like, paint? And you're 18, right? So you don't sign your life on this dotted line. They tell you if you leave, they'll come get you. And, so you're stuck. So they're like, yeah, you're gonna have to paint if you don't pass these classes. And fast forward, I realized that they actually set you up with other jobs, but you're 18, out of school, or young, not knowing. And so I was like, man, okay, well, I guess I got to figure out how to pass these classes.
Right.
And I don't know if you guys ever seen G.I. Jane, but they like in the SEALs, they like ring a bell basically when you leave. So they would like walk you out if you failed enough of these tests. So anyway, I was sitting in the back of the class, failing the class as usual. And I remember our, they called the petty officers, but basically a higher ranking person came and sat down with me and was like, look, you obviously got some sort of smarts or else you wouldn't be in this program. Do you want to get through it? And they said, if you do, you're going to have to start studying and you're going to have to start getting tutoring. And so I started sitting and I moved to the front. They taught me how to take notes, how to learn. So I really actually learned how to learn in the military, in the Navy, learned how to study. Eventually I stopped failing, and actually, interestingly, I started becoming like one of the highest performers there. And I remember a young guy comes to me and he's like, man, why didn't you go to school for engineering? And I'm like 19 at that point. I've been there for a year. I'm like, what's an engineer? He was like, well, he like laughs at me first. He's a young guy from Kentucky. He's like, damn, you don't know what an engineer is?
You don't know what an engineer is?
I was like, nah, man. And he's like, well, this thermodynamics, these engines, all this stuff, this is what engineers build this stuff. He's like, man, I was studying this, but I ended up dropping out of college to come to do this. I was like, dang, wow, that sounds cool. And so that was like a first like spark in my head. Like, man, if you are good at like learning, there's these other things you can do. So that was like the first time I applied myself, like really applied myself.
Right. And so when did you when did you start going to college?
So I got out of the military about 22, and that's when I went back home to LA. And at that point, I had been to another number of countries, and I'd seen enough. I had the engineer kind of in my head,
right?
And I was putting it together, right? Because now we went from learning to like operating, and so I'm out there operating these power plant, all the equipment on the power plants, and I'm learning about the ship because the ship is huge. Yeah, it's an aircraft carrier, and then we have all these other ships we pull into ports. I was like, man, I want to build these ships. I think engineers build these ships. Yeah. So I kind of put that together when I got home to LA. I was like, well, I'm gonna go build ships. I'm gonna be an engineer to build ships. And this is kind of Google wasn't that big in 2002, so you didn't really know how to research this stuff. And I remember going to the university that I knew in LA, which was USC, University of Southern California. Yeah. I knew them because of football, right? They're the home team of when the Raiders left, they became the home team. So I literally walked up to their admissions office and knocked on the door. Was like, hey, I want to come here and learn engineering so I could build ships. And they're like, oh, okay. well, let's see your transcripts, your SATs. I'm like, whoa, why are you bringing up that old stuff? Let me just, how do I get in here? And they were like, well, you really, they end up seeing my transcripts. I was like, ooh, you need to go to a community college first. And then you can come here. You can transfer. I was like, all right, well, what community college? They were like, well, there's a bunch of, I was like, no, which one are you going to accept?
Yeah, right.
And they were like, well, there was Santa Monica College. Was the one that was, had a good transfer rate there. I was like, all right, what classes do I take? Like, I was like, just sitting with the lady. She's like, damn, you are aggressive. I was like, well, I'm really trying to be here. What do I got to do? I'm trying to build ships. So, right. And so, yeah, that's how I got into to school. I started or got into engineering, was going back to a community college and then going to USC.
Okay, and so you at USC, and when you finally get in there, you studied mechanical engineering?
I did study mechanical engineering. It was definitely an eye-opening experience. The amount of resources they had. But I tell you, the eye-opening, the big thing that really stood out for me was I was going to school with kids. So I'm like 25 or 24, 25 at this time, because I had to go to the community college for 2 years. So I was about 24. And so I go in there and we're taking like calculus 2 and 3. And these kids have taken this class.
Yeah.
They've already taken these classes. I'm like, where did you learn that at? Because I remember Algebra 1, maybe in high school, and they had taken like computer-aided design and all this stuff. There was a computer-aided design camps and stuff. And I'm like, how are you guys doing all this stuff in high school? I'm like, my high school didn't have any of that stuff. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, well, my dad's an engineer, and he went here, and my mom went here, and we've got this endowment. I'm like, endowment? What's that? They're writing checks to the school bigger than admission. I'm in the financial aid line trying to get some money. They in a different line giving money. I was like, wow, this is way different. Just kind of learning, like I said, learning what the exposure and the resources that the kids in my classroom had. So I'm like, wow, I got to compete with this. Okay.
Wow. So, I mean, at this point, I mean, you already have, became the perfect student per se. Not perfect student, but in the sense of, how to study, how to, do well in your classes. I'm assuming you graduate. And then at that point, do you immediately start thinking, okay, I'm going to build a business around tutoring? Or do you just think, is this, I'm going to still continue to go, I want to go build ships?
No, I was kind of laser focused on the shipbuilding, but tutoring actually kind of crept in then, because when I got there, you sit in these professor classes and they're like talking about theory and all of this, things that don't show up on the homework. And so then the homework's this way and then the test is this way. So even though I knew how to study, I didn't know how to perform there, because even the community college was a little more straightforward than what I was seeing at the university. So I spent a lot of time with the teacher's assistants, the professor assistant or TAs, learning how to do the homework and getting help. And then also finding who's getting A's in this class and become friends with the people getting A's in the class and studying with them. But the tutoring actually came into play then as something to do to make money for myself. And so I started tutoring kids in the neighborhood for like $10, $12 an hour. Young kids that were either in my old neighborhood or around the school. I would connect in different ways. And it got to a point where I had too many students to cover. So I started recruiting some of my engineering classmates to tutor the kids. And so that's how really the tutoring. So I got tutoring myself. Then I got some people found people that needed tutoring and started having them tutor. But it was years later that tutoring came back up. So I went through the motions of trying to create a business. At that point, I think I got like a DBA. I thought it was big stuff. I went into the bank do DBA and create an account. And I remember that was an experience in itself, just kind of going through those motions. And back then I tried to make a website.
Yeah, right.
Made this raggedy little website where they could sign up for tutoring. But anyway, fast forward, I just, after I graduated from USC, I still was on this shipbuilding. And at that point, actually, you said, did I want to build a business? I had got inklings of being a business person and really wanting to run the business, but not necessarily building and creating a business. And I thought that at that time I wanted to build a shipbuilding company or run a shipbuilding company. And I remember distinctly, like we were in engineering school, we walk around with wrinkled clothes, and over in the business school, they were in suits. And I was like, man, at the business school, they look like they're on to something. We over here studying all night, and they're, it just looked different. And so I decided to get, and this was random, and my girlfriend at the time, she actually helped me with this. She said, you think you might want to be a business person, and you want to do the shipbuilding. Let's find, in mechanical engineering is not a shipbuilding degree, right? There's a degree out there that's for shipbuilding. That's like naval architecture. And so I researched, now I knew how to research. So I researched naval architecture, the shipbuilding portion, and I found the University of Michigan. And they had a dual degree, a business degree and a naval architecture degree, an MBA and a naval architecture degree. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to go there and I'm going to learn how to build ships. I'm going to learn how to run the business of building ships. Right. And so that's how we, that's what I did right after USC, is went on to University of Michigan.
Right. So did you get a chance to spend time building ships?
I did, man. It was an amazing experience. I have lived the life of a naval architect. I went to Korea, worked with them for a bit. They were the best in the world. Worked with in Denmark at Maersk. They're like one of the biggest shipping companies in the world. And then I worked in the United States at a couple of defense contractors that were building ships. And so I did really get to live, I think, what anybody that's, that is interested in shipbuilding, I felt like I really got to experience that. And then the way I got to Houston is we had I was interested in coming to Houston. So I targeted Houston because of the price of living, and I actually did an internship while I was at SC up in northern part of Houston. I remember houses, 4-bedroom homes with 2-car garages for like $150,000. It's like
real estate's cheap out here. It's crazy. It's not even like, it's just insane.
I was like, and this is like 2005, and in LA, that same equivalent, it was like $500,000, $600,000, and they had a Walmart down the street.
Well, $1 million can take you very far out here. You really get you a nice crib out here for sure.
Absolutely. So I was sold on Houston then. It took me about 7 years to end up getting here, but I came to Houston, one, because of that, but also the oil industry. I found out that that's how they transport. I knew that by then, that they transported crude oil by ships. And so I got into projects, and they had these offshore platforms. And so I got into a group that did special projects that built those and installed like different equipment on those things. And so anyway, that's how I got to Houston, is working.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. And so at what point did the idea for interviewing come up?
Yeah, so where'd that come from, right? All right, so how'd I get into tutoring? So when I was working for that company, actually even before I came to Houston, I had in business school, they get your head thinking about, that you're gonna run things that, like, I think they say, you're working on business cases as if you're like the CEO of, this major corporation, and you get out and you're like, you're at the, not even middle management, right? You're just like, so you got all these ideas in your head, And so I got out thinking that I was going to run a shipbuilding company. And they're like, no, get in this cubicle and get to work.
Right.
I was like, man, this, okay. And I'm like looking at folks that have been working 30, 40 years and they're, you know, some of them aren't even at the top of this place. And I'm like, man, what's the chances of me becoming like the CEO here are pretty slim. And I was like, okay, well, how do I buy a ship?
But you had that idea though.
I did. I had the idea that I wanted to at least run the place.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the idea of starting a business.
Right.
Until I realized that in order for me to work up to the leadership or the highest levels of the company, it would take years, 20 plus years to get there. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna start a business. And then eventually I'll buy a ship. I'll buy I'll buy into a company at that point if I could just start my own company. And I was like, well, what can I do that is that doesn't cost a lot of money, and maybe there's this upside to it. And I started around that time. I think we had Amazon, we had Craigslist, we had like eBay, and apps were becoming big. So this was 2007. No, I got out 2008 to 2010. That's when I got my first or when the iPhone dropped and you had all these apps and stuff on your phone. And there's an app for that, right? And so I was like, all right, well, now that we're getting more, technology savvy, things are, moving in that direction. I said, let me try my hand at building a website now that can, looking at like Craigslist and looking at these marketplaces.
Right.
And I said, I'm going to build I thought back, I was like, well, let me do that tutoring thing again. And I'll build a marketplace where I can connect students and parents and folks that tutor. And so I started tinkering around with that right before I came to Houston. And then I came to Houston, I started working these projects. And I just kept tinkering around with it. And it took me a few years to get something that was like viable. And I'll tell you, I learned then, like, you can plan all you want, but until you put something out there, you don't learn really what you have. And so I spent a good 3-4 years playing around with a website and then finally trying to get end user to use it. And I learned right then, as soon as I started doing that what I had built was not really built for really anybody, but for me tinkering around. And so I started that, like I said, kind of in a on the side, just building a website. And then I want to say maybe 2015. So that's pretty bad. I played with this website for 4 years, man. And finally I was like, all right, let me try to get some users in 2015. I was like, let me try to get some people on the site. Around that time, I was starting to learn more about, we had high oil prices and we were going into a downturn on oil prices. And before that, what I realized is I was like, when we were in high oil prices, we were ramping up. We were hiring a lot of people. I mean, we probably hired like 50, 60 people in like my group. And while we hired all those people, I was like the only Black person. And I was like, dang, okay, hiring people. Why aren't we hiring any people of color, right? I mean, they weren't hiring any Hispanics. I was like, man, okay. And I remember approaching my manager at the time, and it was a dual manager. One was from Korea, and the other one was from South Africa. And we had hired like 8 Koreans. So I was like, all right, I know you can hire who you want. I kind of approached them. I said, hey, look, what are we doing about hiring? We're saying we want diversity, but what are we doing about it? And they told me point blank, they were like, look, man, we've been trying to hire Black people. Do you know any? I was like, what? I was like, yeah, do you know any Black people that would come and work for us? I'm like, well, all Black people know each other. So let me see. I was joking, but I was like, okay, hold on. What do you mean? It was like, well, we've been to all these universities. We have this big outreach program, but we can't get anybody with these skills. And man, that's when it hit me. He said, think back. Was there anybody from class that you remember that might be out, that might be interested? And I realized then I was the only Black person that graduated from the University of Southern California with a mechanical engineering degree. I was the only Black person that graduated from the naval architecture degree. The business school had, a good portion of Black people. And I was like, wow. I didn't realize that because I had my head down grinding.
Right.
I didn't even care. I was like, whoever, I don't care who's in here. I'm just going. And that's when he hit me and they was like, well, let's show you some more stats. And they said, we have, all these students that are graduating or in K-12 every year, but the pool of talent is really small. It's shrinking. He said, they were like, we only got like 20,000 engineers graduating every year. And they're like, the majority of them are not Black or Hispanic. Right. I was like, wow. They were like, yeah, it's actually it's a challenge for us. We have to do visas to get talent from overseas. But they're like, population wise, we got plenty of people. We just don't have them graduating from universities, but they're in the schools. And they said, we can get you into the university team to go recruit, but really we need help in the schools. That's where in the schools, in it, like K-12, in the schools, in the elementaries, the middles, and high schools. And they said, you're not going to get somebody into a seat today, but you could work on planting the seed and getting them into these roles in the future. I was like, wow, that's deep. So anyway, I went and I started going to schools in Houston. And I was like, I want to go to the schools that are predominantly Black. And I'll go talk to them. And I went to those classes, and I would had this big presentation about the company and all this cool stuff. Well, at least I thought it was cool. And I would present to them, and I think I did it twice. And then I stopped. I was like, what do y'all want to be when you grow up? I started I was like, forget this presentation. Tell me what y'all want to be. And I started asking them. It'd be like 25 kids in the room, and I had all of them. I asked them, what do you want to be? What do you want to be? And the majority of them, they would say they want to be celebrities and ball players. And some I was like, there's some ball players. I was like, man, stand up. I'm in high school. I'm like, you're not even taller than me. So, and I ain't tall. So I'm like,
everyone has that dream, and
right.
School to be a professional.
And so, I found it troubling, and I started asking them why. And a lot of them were like, I want to be rich. I was like, all right, well, tell me what's rich. And like 40,000, 50,000. I feel bad. I'm like, well, that, I'm thinking, that's not rich. Yeah. Like, that's okay. And in the future, that's going to be even tougher. Not knocking the salary or anything. And I was like, okay. But then someone was like, I want to make 100,000. Someone want to make $1 million. I was like, all right, now we talking. If you really want to be rich. So I started talking to him. I was like, well, here's some of the jobs that can get you $1 million, right? You don't have to be LeBron James, who's like 1 in 7 billion, right? You don't have to, you can be the dude that sits on the court side that's making, or in the box, making money, making a lot of money. And I was like, if you want to make $1 million, I started going over roles. I was like, like I said, I was supposed to be talking about this company that I was representing. But then I started talking to them. I was like, well, private equity, they make this. The hedge funds, they make this. And, I was, just talking about these roles. And I was like, you know what? You don't even have to be that smart. It's not even that competitive to do these roles. I was like, I went to school with some of these cats. They all right. That are doing these jobs. They all right. Not knocking them, but I was like, they just knew where to go.
Right.
And so I did those. I did a few of those, and it really just kind of bothered me, actually. I mean, it just kept eating at me. I was like, damn, these kids, you're in the room. It's like Jeff Bezos comes to the room. He's like, yo, you want to be a billionaire? This is how you do it. Then he leave.
Right.
It's like the gap is the gap's not gonna close, right? It's not like you're gonna take that notes down. Like, all right, cool. Let me go work on being a billionaire now. And so I felt like I wasn't really getting there to them. And then the aha happened for me because I'm tinkering around with this tutoring, and they're telling me, oh, the other thing they said, they're like, we're not. I was like, well, I started telling them about these roles. I was like, you can do this. This makes 100. You can be a dentist. You can be a surgical dentist. I was just telling them all these roles. Like, this makes this much money. This makes this much money. And then they would say, well, I'm not good at math. I was like, man, that's a muscle.
Yeah.
You can get good at math. That's nothing. And I remember that's when I said that it kind of the aha happened. I said, one, these kids are just like me. I didn't know what, you asked me earlier about college. I was like, I didn't know why.
Yeah, you didn't know about it.
What? I didn't know that you could make money. I'd never seen anything outside of my neighborhood. So they were, a lot of kids would talk about like things that they would see in their neighborhood, and nobody else was necessarily going to college for any of these roles that I'm talking about. So they didn't know, and they didn't know why, like how math and reading and all these subjects and all this, why academics was tied to that. And so I saw that, like I said, I saw myself and I was like, man, what if the tutoring exposed them to these roles and the salaries while I helped them with reading and math? And that's kind of that was the spark right there. Because I had been playing with this application, and what I had built was really for parents, but more affluent parents, because I didn't know. And I was like, well, I got to get this application in the hands of these young people that are unfortunately in poverty. They're not going to pay for tutoring. And it was like a few things came together, and I found out that schools paid for support. Oh, okay, this is it. I can build something, and now I had like it wasn't just build something for anything. I was a little bit. At that point I was a little pissed off because I realized that, like, again, I saw myself, and then I also saw that I could do something that was actually positive. It wasn't just to build something. I could help these kids, and so that, like I said, that was the beginning.
That was the beginning.
Yeah.
So
that was the beginning.
what all do you do? What all do y'all do at Intervene K-12?
So we run assessments on students. So that was a piece that we kind of put together, was figuring out where the skill gaps were, because you're working with a 9th or 10th grader that may be missing gaps from like 3rd, 4th, 6th grade. So we run assessments first. Then once we have the assessments and the data that tells us where they need help, we build content. And in that content, that's where we're embedding that workforce readiness. So I had to learn all these terms, right? Workforce and career, military readiness. But anyway, that's where we embed that information, along with, say, the reading skill that we've identified. So we have the reading skill identified, we have the content that matches, and then we have a tutor online that's using this content to help them. So it's assessments, it's analytics, and this online small group instruction or small group tutoring. And it's in education, they call it intervention, hence the name Intervene. Yeah. So it's response to intervention.
Wow. I read that you guys, I think, almost helped over 30,000 students.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Is it all just here in Texas?
No, it's the majority is in Texas, but we just started moving last school year. We moved into multi-state. So we helped some kids. We helped some schools. We worked in Michigan, worked in Kansas City, Connecticut. And now we're starting to move into more states. But we definitely were working with Texas primarily for the first 3.5 years or so.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So with your background being in engineering and having a background in business, right? And then now you understand where, okay, this is going to be what I'm going to go do. How were you able to bridge the gap between, I'm assuming, the technology used for the assessments, right? The online tutoring, how you were like, okay, how I'm going to put this together? Do I need support from someone else? Do I need to bring in a co-founder? How were you able to bridge that once you got this idea?
So actually, I had a co-founder, and he came from the classroom, and he was an interventionist. So he's the one that taught me about the assessments and analytics they were running in the classrooms. And what he shared with me and taught me, he was actually a mentor too. But what he taught me was about the analytics and data that would really, knowing that information would be able to drive like growth. So when him and I came together, I felt like, oh, we got to have instruction. We got to have, the kids need to see themselves in the content. They need this career workforce readiness. And he helped think, or he was thinking about like the data portion. And so we bridged that together and started building like our first iteration, right, of this data platform, assessment platform, with this reporting capability. And so we had, I think we had one developer, one software developer, and we kind of articulated to him, this is what we want this to do. Then we brought in a company, which we thought was a company. It was a guy and a guy and another guy. It was a company, but we had him really help us take it to the next level as far as our assessment capability. And then we just kept building in all that time I had spent. What I didn't mention is the tutoring while I was, working at the company that I left. And, while I was going out there talking to schools, I had eventually launched that first iteration. And I had it out there. I had some users. And I learned how to manage tutors online and like recruiting them, getting the background checks, getting them set up and go through, a system. So I had built that system to rapidly recruit and like deploy them. And like how to deploy them. And I had learned this lesson, man. Because the first iteration was tutoring in person. And I sent this young lady to a house, sent her to this house, and she calls me. She's like, look, sir, she was so sweet. She's like, look, sir, I really like working with the kids and they're the kid, but I can't go to this neighborhood again.
She was scared of the neighborhood.
She was scared of the neighborhood. And I was like, oh, you might be in danger. I didn't even think about like sending people physically to people's houses and their homes.
Right.
What that could look like. And I was like, oh, no. We got to figure something out. And we launched online. I quickly pivoted to online tutoring. So anyway, so I did that because of, safety reasons.
Yeah, safety reasons.
And then also I realized I could ping people into different places. Right. So one person driving to one location can service that one person in that hour. Right. Their commute might be 30 minutes, another, so I lose 2 hours. But if I beam them to place in that hour, I could serve 2 people and maybe 4 people, 5 people, depending on how much, as long as I kept them working and kept the schedule. And so I knew that. And that's when we started piecing it together. Was like, okay, I know how to run this tutoring thing. Let's let the data help us figure out what to help the kids with.
Right. Okay. And you were able to put it together that way. So did you go through an accelerator? Did you to raise money, I'm assuming, or were you funding once you got on with your co-founder to add the assessment piece to it? Did you all say, okay, let's go raise money, or let's just use our own funds?
So the whole concept of raising money was like brand new.
Right.
I just trying to think of somebody giving me some money. Like people say, go raise money with friends and family. I'm like, I don't got friends like that.
Yeah.
They write me no checks. My family,
yeah,
I got it. Like this don't work out. I got to talk to them again.
Yeah, right.
So I was
my
like,
family's gonna write a check.
They wasn't trying to write no check either.
Yeah.
So because I did ask a little bit, but I was like, okay, well, I was like, how much money I actually need to build this web platform? Because I've already been building this thing. So I was like, I got to iterate a little bit. I was like, I don't need a lot of money to do that. So I didn't really need a lot of money. I didn't know what to use money for. So I was like, well, we built a platform. Let's go see if somebody will buy it, right? So we went to conferences, like we would set up a conference booth. We didn't have any materials or anything. I remember we had a chalkboard. We were writing on the chalkboard like different things to get their attention to see if they liked it. And so we went to about 4 or 5 different conferences around Texas. But as far as money, I was funding it. And my co-founder was still working at the time. I had left my job at that point. And this was like 2016. I had left the job to just do it full time. One thing I had learned, just hope I'm not talking too many circles here, but I remember it was like you ever heard of the Ghost of Christmas Past and Future or whatever, like
right. The Scrooge?
The Scrooge,
right?
Yeah,
the Scrooge, yeah.
Man, I got on this plane. It was like the same thing for me. I got on a plane I was working and going back and forth to Brazil. And I remember sitting next to this entrepreneur and, he's in jeans chilling. I'm in like a suit, about to go on like a 10-hour flight on a suit, he chilling. I was like, man, what do you do? And he told me he ran a company, he started a company. I was like, man, I want to start a company too. And he told me, he's like, man, what are you doing? Why don't you start a company? I was like, well, trying to get this bills or trying to save up enough money. He's like, man, forget that, man. Just start the company. He's like, leave your job, first of all, and then start the company. I was like, nah, my bills don't work like that. He was like, look, you will figure it out. But you're not going to figure anything out if you don't. Go for it. And literally flying back to the United States, I met another entrepreneur sitting right next to him. And he was telling me the same story. He's like, man, I left my job, started a company. I'm like, damn, okay. This is crazy. And then it was around December. I fly back to LA and there's another entrepreneur sitting next to me. And he was just asking me what I do. And I'm like, at this time I'm in jeans chilling. I got upgraded to first class because I've been flying back and forth so much. And I'm like, and he tells me his story. He's an entrepreneur too. And all of them had left their job. All of them had focused. And I was like, man, this is a sign. This is God. And so not too far after that, I left the job. So anyway, I feel like share that.
It was fate. It was fate for you to have that all the universe like lined up. God put those people in your path to kind of, say, hey, it was meant for you to kind of leave your job. So you leave your job. Like you said, my bills don't work like that. Well, hey, listen, the way my bills are set up, just can't just leave. You just can't get up and leave. Right. I'm assuming, right, at this point, you have a family at this point, or you are, right? But you just can't. How were you able to adapt when you just say, you know what, I'm just going to go full time into this?
So I had bought some real estate. Read this really good book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it was about liabilities and assets. And so I bought like a fourplex, and we were living in one unit. And so we left. My wife really wanted a house, so we bought a house. I was mad. I didn't want to leave this house. I didn't want to leave this little apartment because it paid for everything. We ended up leaving there, and I closed on the house like literally like the 2 days or 3 days before I left the job. And so I've got this property kind of cash flowing, right? And so that was like a little buffer. And my wife works, so we lived pretty lean. And Hurricane Harvey comes and wipes that out. I didn't have no insurance. So that really hurt. And so, you asked a question about bootstrapping or raising capital. So we didn't raise any capital. We literally, once we kind of positioned and said, this is what we're going to sell, we just tried to sell it, right? Just ask people for feedback and ask them if they would be willing to. It took us a little while to ask them for them to pay. And then I think the first thing that we sold was like $300. So we weren't really paying our bills or anything with that. But anyway, so when we left, I had a little buffer, and I think it was about 3 or 4 years before I started paying myself really. So I was okay, and then I wasn't, and that's when it got really hard. But just stuck in it.
Right.
Just kept going.
Well, when it did get hard, did you have the thoughts to go back to work, or did you have to go back to work?
I think I thought about going back to work, but not in the capacity of like a job like I had. I thought about like working in like a warehouse at nighttime just to make bills.
Yeah.
But at that point, I was just too far in. Like I had my mind really, really focused on like we're gonna make this thing work. And so at that point, it was just about making bills than it was about like going making six figures at a job.
It was just too deep in it to say,
Yeah.
you know what, I can't turn back.
Yeah.
It's just like I have to keep pushing through.
I mean, when you're working basically from 8 a.m. to like 3, 4 a.m. every day, there's a certain amount of like commitment at that point that it's hard to like even think about working for another company. You just can't. You just can't when you got. At least for me, I was just stuck because I was like, the next thing is gonna like the next thing I have to do is I have to build something, have to create something, or I have to go to this event, or I gotta try to meet with this client. And so it was just nonstop trying to build, trying to create, trying to grow. So, thinking of another job is like it's kind of a waste of my time and bandwidth to do that. Which is crazy. Back. I'm like,
you look back at it.
Yeah.
Right. And so when did things start to change?
So I think in 2018 was, a game-changing year for us because we realized the value of what we were building. When we were trying to sell our programs, it was this posture of please give us a chance. And what I didn't know about schools and districts was that, there's a lot of red tape, right? These are, they have to do a lot of due diligence on who they purchase programs for. This is taxpayer money. And so even though you've got something good, if you don't present it as value add and solving a pain point, it's like, okay, well now I got to take a chance on something. And these administrators, they can't really, they're not in the business of taking chances, right? You're talking about, folks that their jobs are on the line. If they make mistakes. And so for us in 2018, we've been working on assessments. We've been working on trying to put it all together, the assessments. So we sold the assessments for a little while and we learned about reporting and how to do our data. And so we were ready to launch the tutoring portion. And so we brought it full circle. And in 2018, we got our first contract. And you asked about accelerators. So we got into an accelerator program out in Austin. It was called Div Inc. So it's like for minority founders.
Div Inc,
Yes.
So very popular here.
So we got in. So they were just in Austin. They didn't have the Houston footprint yet.
Yeah.
So we got in there, but at the same time, we sealed our like first it was a $28,000 contract, right, to do the tutoring. And the dean of that school sat down with me and she was like, you understand what you're doing, right? This is game changing. You do this right and you're going to have a huge impact. And so I'm traveling back and forth to Austin and this deal comes through and I'm like, you know what? Another one comes through. And so we're like at $60,000, right? And I'm telling you, we were selling our programs for like $300, right? So this kind of money is like, whoa, they're actually paying this kind of money?
Yeah.
And so I had to like leave the Div Inc. Accelerator. I was like, hey, I just want a contract. I gotta go like actually concentrate on delivering this thing. And I'm going back and forth. There was no money at the time. They didn't give us any money. So I'm on my own dollar going back and forth to Austin, trying to find a place to stay. And I was like, you know what? I gotta go back and service this thing. And that's when we stood up the tutoring. I mean, we really worked hard. I remember I was tutoring. We had to figure out how to get a bunch of tutors. But again, I have done this before, but not at this scale. And that was really a pivot point for us. And the follow-on school year, we kept growing. And I think that year, that calendar year, we made like our first north of 100,000, like 115,000 or something like that. We're like, whoa. So I'm like, look, let's make 500,000 at that moment. Let's do, let's go bigger next, right? And that's when I started saying we should probably go get investors. Because I was talking to, the accelerator was all about investors and getting ready for pitching. I was like, all right, we're big enough, or we got something that I think an investor would be interested in. And man, everybody turned us down. Like every time we reached out to them, they'd be like, nah, talk to us. It seems like you might have something, but like talk to us when you get to 500,000. Okay. And so that year we ended up doing like 350,000, right? I'm like, they gotta talk to us now, right? So we went back to the investors, and they're like, yeah, you're onto something, but no, I take it back. They said get to 300,000 and come talk to us. We got to 350, and they're like, nah, not yet. Talk to us when you get to 500. Okay, and then the next year we did like 800,000. Whoa, okay, now we're growing. And investors like, yeah, talk to us when you get to 1 million. I was like, I'm not talking to you guys no more. I was like, forget it. We're going to focus on the real investor for us, who is our customers. And we're going to just focus on doing a really good job for them.
So in that early stages, what kind of feedback were you all getting from investors? They were like, tutoring, we don't know. Is this, what were some of the feedback that you got from investors?
Man, there's a saying that says, if you want to raise capital, ask an investor for advice. If you want advice, ask an investor to write you a check. And that's all we were getting was advice. Like we would go and they're like, well, you should tweak your pitch deck this way. Or, is there really a market? How are you going to get all the tutors to do this? How are you going to scale? Prove to us that you can scale. And it was like all this prove. You don't have this, you don't have that. And we're like, well, that's why we're asking for money. We want that, but like we're hustling. Yeah. Not hustling as a negative thing. Like we're like busting our, behinds trying to do all this stuff. It is just two of us and a developer who is a company or another individual, right? Yeah. And so like, that, and we're like, well, how are we supposed to do this? And so that was kind of the feedback. It was just like, you're not ready. We're not sure you got a market, and come back to us when you make more money.
So you guys are now at 800,000 in sales.
Yeah.
Like you go back to the investors and they still tell you no?
At that point, because this is 20. I'll get my years mixed up. So I think what happened was it was 2021 when we hit our first 800,000. And what happened at that point was like, and our fiscal year is all different than the calendar year because we go by the school year. So we'll say school year 2021, we had 800,000. At that point, I actually was done talking to investors. I was like, you know what? They're not wanting to back us, and we're getting momentum that we can pay our own bills and we can start paying people. And so I was like, you know what? I do better focusing on our customers, focusing on our product, than focusing on an investor. And then we did end up getting some seed capital of $200,000 check. But that's like, we're already at 800,000. So I was like, okay, well, thank you. don't really need your money, but thank you. But they gave us advice. And that was even more like the real advice. Like, we're going to hook you up. We're going to connect you with some people. So they took a vested interest in us. And that was the CEO of a company called Amplify, which is another big education firm, and his business partner, Zach. And they mentored us. And so at that point, I wasn't seeking capital. And I had another mentor who told me, he said, stop selling stuff for like $3,000, $4,000. You need to set the price a little higher. And he said, you have to sell to the district, which, you got districts and
Right.
campuses.
You have to sell to the school districts. You can't just sell the individually to the schools.
Exactly. Because we had to do so much for the campus sales. And we're like, do the same amount for the district sale and they'll take you serious, and you set your price point higher. So we didn't inflate our numbers. We just had more schools, more students rolling up to the district. And they're like, you got to put all this infrastructure behind servicing, because these are people, right? You got people, different times and stuff. So they're like, you had to do these technology integrations. And so they're like, he was like, look, just set you're not going to get every deal, but if you can get 1 million, you get, 10 clients at $100,000, $1 million, your life is going to change. And I did that. And then we ended up getting to 13 million. And I was like, okay, now we're on, and that's when the investors started calling us, which was a completely different conversation.
Right.
So yeah.
Wow. No, that is, something that, again, you put yourself in a position to where investors are calling you, right? You build something, right? They tell you no. And now it's just like, okay, I'm gonna show you, right? It was that determination that you had to kind of keep going. Did you keep that in mind, or did you just say, you know what, I'm focusing on just growing the business and not worry too much about investors?
Yeah, I wasn't worried about investors because honestly, I didn't know what I would use their money for.
Yeah,
because I was like, well, we got money now.
Yeah.
Like, what? I don't know what to do with the money at that time. I was just like, well, let's just keep growing, keep doing a good job, and we had margins, we were profitable.
Yeah.
And I could start paying people like market rates. I was like, okay, where does the investor come in? And so then I started seeing like my competition. We had always watched the competition, but not from an investment lens to see what they could do. More like, how are they moving in the market? What were their products? But not what positioning. So we learned a lot about the positioning. I was like, okay, that's one of the things that money can do. And also scaling. It's like, okay, this is now I'm starting to get it. But before that, like, honestly, man, when people start talking about raising capital, at the beginning, I was like I said, I was like, well, we just built a program. We got enough. We had enough money to build a program. So where does investment dollars come in? Let's just go to the market and sell it. Right. And so it was still that mentality that I had when we started getting a decent size revenue.
Right. And so what's your plans over the next couple of years with the company?
So yeah, man, we're so I always had a master plan, right? Like I was like, when we built the program, we built it so that we could go into different markets. Because you recall what I was saying is my first iteration of this was for like parents to pay for for them to get tutoring. And so while I was tinkering for years, I started figuring out all the different places that people might want instruction. And then I also figured out, not all the ways, I figured out a number of places that online instruction became key. And so we're now, wanting to continue to grow and build and service the mission-driven, what I would say, portion of Intervene K-12 is like helping those kids that are underserved communities and helping them, with that career focused support, but helping them with those core subjects, reading and math. But that's not the only people that maybe need help. And so we're just looking at ways to position what we have, because what we have is the ability to instruct at scale, right? Thousands of people in a day are working with us, students, tutors, and so on. And we're managing that. And so there's a lot that you can do with that. So not to give too much away, 'cause I don't know who's going to watch, but we're going to be moving into a few different verticals, I would say, over the next 6 to 12 months. But I will say this. I had a master plan around this, and I just needed to prove out that we could scale up the operation to try new stuff. So now I'm in that place of just like, all right, let me try a few things to see,
Now, can individual parents sign their students up for Intervene K-12, or it's mostly the schools?
So through the schools, that's our main avenue today. We do have another program that's for parents. That's kind of in a beta stage right now. I think we'll probably drop that before the end of the year. But it's kind of a completely different interface, if you will, than the Intervene K-12.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's awesome. Well, Aaron, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. Always ask this question. So what advice would you give the other entrepreneurs?
So, the thing that, that I chose you was like the impediment, or not impediment, but the impetus. There you go. The impetus for me was, being passionate about something and wanting to do something for people, for young people, trying to get them into corporate America. I feel like if you can get passionate about whatever it is that you want to do, that is going, or if you have passion around what you want to do, that in itself is going to help with the drive and the long hours, because it's a marathon, and it's sprinting a marathon too. So being passionate about your whatever you're doing, and maybe some people are just passionate about building, whatever the case is, but you got to have, it can't just be the money. You may be, okay, I'm going to make some money out of it, but you got to, whatever you're building, whatever you're doing, you got to be passionate about it, to put in that work. And then the other thing is, if you can, and you're working, try to make the job part-time. And I know that's a difficult thing to say, but make the job part-time and make the company, whatever you're building, full-time. Because that full-time focus, all your energy and everything that you're pushing through, you want to be able to focus on that. And so you got to have something that's, whatever if that's not your income, you got to have something. Your income cannot drain your mind, because you need that creative space to just push at your company. So I think those two things are what I would suggest to any entrepreneur.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Oh, no, appreciate you. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you, and commend you for this work. I'm really a big fan already of the brilliant ones. And so looking forward to listening to you and more entrepreneurs and learning from you.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks.
No doubt.